Hello, hello. This is Irene with SaugaTalks. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I think by now many of our followers know where to find SaugaTalks. Okay, so please follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on major podcasting platforms. All right, we're working really hard, bringing the best and the brightest. And as you probably know, or if you're new to the show, we do discuss artificial intelligence, automation, the new way of working, future of work, lots of topic around cloud, around metaverse, sometimes NFTs at some point. So we're covering broad set of topics, but most importantly, we're bringing the experts, the leaders to your attention, and they're so generous with their time, with their experience and expertise to give us some tips how to succeed, how to adapt technology the right way. So excited today because Karl Swanepoel here with us. Karl, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing incredibly well. We're gonna talk about what you do and broader ideas of your entrepreneurial experience with marketplaces, with gig economies. Please shed some light. What do you see happening out there with freelancing, gig economy, creator economy? Why you do what you do?
Sure. Well, I mean, to summarize it, it's the future. Even today, nearly a third of the global workforce are freelancers. In the next 4 years, McKinsey predicts that more than half of the US workforce will be freelancers. So, it's already a big trend and it's definitely continuing. We also see, like, for example, Generation Z, much more, I think in the creator space than ever before. So I think it's a very exciting way of work. It's a great way for people to kind of reclaim freedom and flexibility. And ultimately, I started my journey as a freelancer, and I'm passionate about changing and improving the industry for the better.
Exactly, because okay, let me play some kind of devil advocacy over here for a moment in terms of setting up the space. Okay, I understand the value. Maybe our audience understand the value, but still, it's important to kind of put that distinct pointers. Full-time employment used to be the kind of the way to work, the way to live. All right, not the case anymore. Even in the roles, in the professions that used to be more, I would say, defined. All right. So right now we look everywhere, marketing, development, software engineering, you name it, right? Web development, so many areas that just blossoming because of the flexibility, because of the digital economy and the platforms that are available. All right. So let's just start right there. Karl, how do you see this complex professional world taking it all in? Okay, a company comfortable hiring for freelancers. What do you see? What kind of pain points you still think out there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, everything has its pros and cons. There are certainly advantages to a traditional job over something like freelancing. But personally, I think on the balance, the advantages of freelancing are far stronger than any sort of disadvantages. And I think to a degree, you have to kind of choose between your comfortability with risk, and freedom and flexibility, because ultimately becoming a freelancer is probably higher risk than just kind of going into a traditional employment. But everything in life is a risk. I mean, you can't really avoid risks, and ultimately fortune favors the bold. And you can achieve so much more and go so much further, I feel, as a freelancer. And it's certainly not for everyone, but I think it's for a lot more people than who currently realize that it's for them.
Fantastic. Hearing this from someone like yourself, I know you're child entrepreneur. Can I call you this? Or this is not acceptable, meaning that you exited your first venture at the age of 15?
I did, yes.
You don't hear these stories every day, really. So can you tell us, please, how did you get where you are right now, CEO of Revolancer?
Yeah, sure. So it kind of all started when I was 13 years old, and I just decided that school formal education just wasn't really for me, and that I wanted to be my own boss. So I immediately kind of took steps to work towards that. So uh, just started by Googling how to make money online, found freelancing platforms, kind of started there selling some skills that I had taught myself. mainly first design and then web development. And then from there, I realized that the existing freelancing platforms that I was on, in my opinion, back in 2014 were massively outdated. Now, actually, they haven't changed anything to the present day, other than a fancy rebrand and a name change here and there. But it's essentially, I decided back then that these platforms just weren't serving freelancers right. So I decided to start my own platform at the age of 15, which ultimately I ran for a few months, got it to a few thousand users, but was ultimately forced to sell it because I couldn't have a PayPal account at that age, and PayPal kept on locking my accounts, and I couldn't unlock them because I had to prove I was over 18, which I couldn't do. So ultimately, I was forced to sell it, and I sold it just before my 16th birthday.
We're going to talk about some technology aspect to those transformations, all right? So how do you see, and do you use AI in Revolancer? How do you see AI influencing all the platforms that you're mentioning now? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to preface this, my degree is in AI and robotics, but I wouldn't say that I'm, an expert in this field by any means. And also, I think my opinions on where AI is currently and where it will go in the short-term future are probably not quite like what most people think. So I'm happy to be proven wrong on that. But but essentially, in my view, AI is definitely already having an impact on the freelancing space, but I personally, in the short to medium term, don't see it so much as like replacing people, but more as like a tool that people can use. Because ultimately, something like ChatGPT is very good at writing, but it doesn't. It's essentially just a very advanced kind of predictive text algorithm that has trained on 5 million web pages or so. So it's very good at writing things that sound coherent, but ultimately it can't fact check itself. So, for example, they tried, somebody tried to use ChatGPT to do a specialist exam for a certain medical qualification. I can't remember what it was. But essentially, there were 3 questions, and it was essentially giving it a list of symptoms. And then whoever was taking the test had to attempt to diagnose the patient based on that list of symptoms. ChatGPT had a go at that. It did the first question, got it right. Did the second question, got it wrong. And then for the third question, it completely fabricated a made-up disease to diagnose the patient. So that's just kind of an example. So, just using ChatGPT to generate content is, a bit hit or miss. In a lot of cases, it's a hit for sure, but it can make mistakes. So ultimately, I think the best use for something like ChatGPT at the moment is to sort of save you time in writing about a subject that you know something about, but ultimately you're kind of doing the final fact checking and editing. And in that way, I think that it's helping freelancers who would otherwise have to write a lot of content themselves. They can use this to automate a lot of it and then save time. So it's ultimately a tool to help them work more efficiently for the time being. I think, thinking much longer term, is it going to pose a threat? I think in a lot of ways, yes, it is. But I think that the timeline of that is a lot longer than most people think, in my opinion. Yeah.
You answered 5 of my questions, okay, already. That's fabulous. Speaking of ChatGPT, ChatGPT will not be able to formulate what you just did, Karl, in few sentences, really, because you answered how AI and automation will affect freelancers, okay? You already answered that we don't see replacement coming anytime soon. I agree with you, by the way. I agree, because as we're all practicing with ChatGPT, of course, we find amazing discoveries there. Oh, this is relevant. But absolutely, I read everything what I see there, and I have to critically think about it, all right? Is this plausible? Is this not? Is this too broad? Is this something worth even for me spending time on? All right. So, and of course, we know those models will be evolving, so we will see bright future. But yes, speaking of freelancers, how do they feel now? I mean, are they all as confident in you and I right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think from what I've seen is people kind of fall into one of two camps. So either they, you know, don't really know about ChatGPT, or if they know about it, they kind of maybe haven't used it so much and are more kind of just scared of it because of the media rhetoric around it. Um, and then on the other hand, there is a set of freelancers who have realized that this is actually quite useful for helping them do their work more efficiently and use it quite actively. So in my, from what I've seen, it tends to kind of be one or the other with those two camps.
In this bubble where these talks actually going on 24/7. Okay, you almost don't know where to sleep because Europe wakes up before United States and all the conversation starts again, and all your digital friends updating you what they discovered at this moment. All right, so it's a definitely hot topic, like it or not, right? And we're all kind of experimenting and we see how we're gonna situate ourselves. Are you experimenting in productive way, not just sort of see what's out there, but really are you changing any of development practices for Revolancer?
Actually, so from a kind of development practice, no, we aren't. I mean, so I think it's very important to not buy into hype too much. And what I mean by that is, just because ChatGPT can now suddenly write code, for example, and that's something that it, didn't really exist before in the same way, that doesn't automatically mean that that's now the perfect thing for us to use. I think it needs to be evaluated a lot more rationally. We have in the past and are absolutely continuing to explore implementing different AI solutions into our product, though. So that's something, but where it's my area of interest based on what I studied. But ultimately, it's again the same thing. We're not sort of interested in just having AI for the sake of having AI, and it's the same thing as with crypto. I think in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases where the blockchain is used, the same is true with AI. It doesn't really need to be. So we want to be very kind of pragmatic about what we're doing and not just kind of jumping on kind of hyped up new technologies just for the sake of it, but really kind of evaluating things in a rational way and then using what we think would be most effective for our business.
Yep, I do hear the what mature tech entrepreneur yourself, okay? So I do hear this very weighted kind of thinking in a way that, hey, new tool, new shiny toy out there, that's beautiful, okay? I'm not changing everything I do. Really just waiting it out and seeing where it becomes really relevant to my business. That this is good to hear. This is good to hear because again, if you look at the content, right, in my LinkedIn feed and Twitter, everywhere seem to be you missing out. Okay, if you're not jumping on this wagon, you're missing out. But you mentioned blockchain. Did you play with it? Did you experience? To me, it's kind of the heat is not there anymore. Don't you think so?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's kind of been a big kind of collapse. It was kind of mid last year, especially in the investment world as well. So a good friend of mine started an NFT based tech startup, and he was doing incredibly well with it and receiving a huge amount of interest from VCs kind of at a pre-product stage. And then suddenly, in the middle of the year, this crypto crash kind of happened, and then now the company's folded because simply they cannot gain the level of interest for investment. And that and ultimately I even though I'm not an investor myself, nor do I think I would be in I'd be interested in investing in startups, but maybe not kind of public companies so much. But one thing that Warren Buffett says that I find absolutely fascinating, because he's definitely the most successful investor of all time, and and people have asked him why, and the reason why Warren Buffett is the most successful investor of all time is because of his temperament, and because he doesn't sort of just jump on hype. So for example, when people were hyping up Tesla stock, he didn't invest in that. Throughout the dot-com bubble in the late 90s, early 2000s, he again didn't really invest in there or anything. I think the one tech company he's invested in is Apple, and it took him quite, a little while to do that too. And I think there's a lot that can be learned from that. Just sort of, being rational about things. That's not to say that, there isn't promise in something like blockchain or AI, and there isn't money to be made, but ultimately it's quite volatile. And I think that, in the long term, if you follow what Warren Buffett says and apply that here, you will do better if you just focus on what you really understand and being very rational about evaluating things. So I don't really, buy into this fear of missing out angle. I think if it, and ultimately by letting, by taking kind of a back seat and just watching what happens, we can adopt it at the right time, any one of these new technologies, if we need to, and if it would be beneficial. But equally, I'm not going to, try and use ChatGPT to write, a bunch of our code base, and then suddenly we find out there are like a million issues with it that need to be resolved now. So yeah, I think kind of a tempered approach is best.
You sound to me is a very seasoned entrepreneur. So few advices out there, because there's no, shortage of advices. Okay, where do you start? How do you make your first $1 million? I mean, this is beautiful. But yeah, hearing something from someone like yourself, in a way that startup founders right now, right? It sounds good to be founder. All right, you get the attention for a short period of time. I'm sure you experienced that, right? So what's the thinking that really made you successful, made your friends successful?
I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as successful yet. I certainly hope that I am one day. But I've certainly, I think for my age, I've achieved quite a lot. As for why, I think for a few reasons. So first of all, I'm very honest about what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And my biggest weakness, being 23, is that I do not have decades of industry experience, because I cannot have that at my age. So that's something that I realized, a few years ago. And now, basically to compensate for that, I make sure that I can, constantly connect with and listen to people who have a huge amount of experience, and then factor what they say into my decision making. And that doesn't mean like just, blindly following their advice, but it means, adding their input and their feedback into my whole kind of decision making process, so that I can almost act in my decision making as if I have a lot more experience, but I'm kind of, supplementing that experience and getting it from elsewhere. I think ultimately I'm not really attracted to, this kind of entrepreneur lifestyle or I guess the vanity side of it. I think when I was much younger, I was a lot more interested in that side of things, but now I'm really not. Ultimately, I have a very good idea of what drives me and what makes me happy, and trying to show off to other people does not make me happy in any way. I question whether it actually genuinely makes anyone happy. But ultimately, what does make me happy is solving complex problems and making, a big impact on an industry that I really care about, such as freelancing. So that's something that drives me, and that's something that I really kind of, focus on. So I think being very, very honest with yourself, and understanding your strengths and weaknesses and what drives you is a very, very good starting point. Yeah, I mean, I'd say if I had to boil it down to one thing, I'd say that's pretty good. But also, just, most of the things that I've tried over the past 10 years of where I've started various online businesses and such, most of the things failed, but I never gave up, and I won't ever give up either. So, I think it's just understanding that, like, rethinking your relationship with the concept of failure, and not seeing it as a bad thing, seeing it as a learning experience. Like, it certainly can be a bad thing, but you can turn it into a good thing if you learn from it, and and then go forward. Because the only reason why I've been able to kind of start a company in my last year of university, go into it full time, and then within a couple months of graduating, raise VC funding, which I've never done before. The only reason I was able to do that is because for 8 years before then, I've tried starting a million different online projects. Most of them failed horribly, but it gave me so much experience, and I wouldn't change a thing about that. So yeah, ultimately, it's about rethinking your relationship with failure and just being very, very honest with yourself about what drives you, and what are your strengths and weaknesses, and then supplementing the weaknesses and really focusing on your strengths.
Karl, you come across as a mature person beyond your age, okay? Absolutely. And what you're expressing, not every 40, 50, 60, and 70 years old really know about life. So absolutely, I'm so happy to share this with the audience on SaugaTalks. So if you're listening to us right now, if you're watching us, please follow Karl, because the progress of Revolancer, the interesting, absolutely exciting development in the gig economy and the young entrepreneurs who are making that difference, to me, it's fascinating. This is part of opportunity, for everyone. And to me, freelancing and entrepreneurship, okay, is really very close in a way that every freelancer, all right, you have your micro business running, like it or not, all right, you have all the responsibility, and all the failures, they're your failures, okay? There's no way you can put it on bad boss or bad infrastructure. Create that infrastructure, tools that out there, right? And be the best you can be. So this is absolutely amazing to hear it from you, Karl. All right. So what's the transition? All right. Because you've done it. You've been a freelancer. Now you're entrepreneur, right? So what's the transition out there? Because many of us kind of making it. I myself. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think ultimately you've really hit the nail on the head there. It's being a freelancer and being an entrepreneur are actually kind of one and the same thing. I think the difference is that people see, if people think of freelancers, they think more of like a one-person sort of company or project, and it's maybe more of like a lifestyle business in the best possible sense of the phrase. But entrepreneur can kind of, I think there's more of kind of like a growth ambition attached to that word. Ultimately, it's most important to do what makes you happy and what fulfills you, and that could be having that growth mindset. It could be just like working maybe just a few hours a week with a couple of clients and being able to sustain yourself and having a lot of free time. So really, for me, all freelancers in my view are entrepreneurs, and kind of vice versa as well. But just the key difference kind of being that growth mindset that I think is more an entrepreneur thing.
Let's jump back to technology, though, all right? So bringing the kind of meat to this discussion in a way that I know that Revolancer is the best marketplace for freelancers, so that much I learned for sure. But what kind of technology you think freelancers should acquire immediately? I mean, maybe favorite tools with is not a promotion, right? You don't have to even name the names, but at least in terms of skills, capabilities, technology that will help freelancers to become the best they can be.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of technology, the cliche answer is ChatGPT. I think there are lots of things that can help you with, from like drafting emails to if you have a blog or something where you write about your work, to using it for that. There are so many things where you can actually use it to save you time. So I'd say that's a good starting point. In terms of other tools, I think ultimately the best thing to do is to really invest in yourself and keep learning as much as possible. I think that's going to help you more than any one individual tool can, because that's really how you can set yourself apart. And the one, something like ChatGPT, one thing that won't really be able to do is sort of think, and that's where humans are still much better. So really just developing yourself as an individual, your skills, your thinking process, your sales ability, because that's a big part of freelancing too, is kind of pitching and selling to clients. I think that's really the best thing to focus on.
So I cannot not bring up the marketing side of entrepreneurship, okay? Because we know so many people who just love their product. They ideated something, they even built something, and it becomes their day-night focus. And of course, we know, without telling the world, without raising the awareness, kind of what you're doing right now, right? There's no success as we envision it. So how do you see this balance, being a founder and CEO, the balance between spending your time, your life on quality product versus really advocating for that product and for the people behind you?
So with work-life balance, that's a really, really interesting question. I'm someone who's definitely prone to overworking myself. And towards the start of my journey, I did burn myself out quite badly. So I made sure to really learn from that. But the one thing that has helped me more than anything else with developing a better work-life balance has been sort of this saying that starting and running a business is a marathon, not a sprint. And the key thing being there is that in a marathon, for pretty much all of it, you have to purposefully run slower than you actually could to make it the whole way, in a sensible kind of time frame. And I think that the same thing is true for life as well. So whether you're a freelancer, an entrepreneur, it doesn't really matter what you do, but the idea that it's a long-term game. You have to pace yourself so that you can actually make it the whole way is really key, and that's something that I kind of live by.
Fantastic. Karl, I so appreciate your time today. This is amazing. I mean, I started conversation about technology, but you purposely diverted it to what makes us happy, to what makes us productive. Because again, humans are behind these tools, behind this technology, and these tools are for people. So absolutely, the more empathy there is in the world for your users, right? For your audience, for my audience, okay? The better, the stronger we'll become. Absolutely, Karl. Thank you so very much. In conclusion, we did talk about technology. We did talk about gig economy, and you precluded all my questions with your insights and experience. And this is amazing. Okay, this is human interaction. You will not see this in ChatGPT. I'm sure of that. Okay, so just to leave our audience with few takeaways, could you summarize maybe some takeaways that they can remember this talk by?
Sure. Yeah. So I think first of all, like in terms of the technology side, I think a key takeaway is that ChatGPT, I think it's worth thinking about it more as a tool you can use to advance, faster and kind of work more efficiently. It doesn't matter who you are. There's probably a way you can integrate it into your workflow. Think about it more as that than something that's going to like replace you or be some kind of like enemy or take over the world or something. I don't think that's realistic in the short to medium term at all. And then probably the main thing on more of the entrepreneurial side is to just kind of really be honest with yourself about your strengths and weaknesses, work with other people who have, significant experience, change the way you think about failure. So, seeing it as a learning process, as a really powerful learning process, because there's no better teacher, to be honest, at least in my experience. And ultimately, I think, the most important kind of key takeaways, no matter what it is that you kind of want to do, I think the best thing to do is just to take the leap, because ultimately choosing not to do it is a choice in and of itself, even though it feels like the safe outcome. But everything in life has risk. So ultimately, I think it's worth giving it a shot because, well, fortune favors the bold.
Thank you, Karl. Thank you. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for being a fantastic guest on SaugaTalks today. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.